Matt Miguez has plenty on his mind, and he's ready to share it with the world. It's time to hear the Miguez Mindset.
Welcome into the Miguez Mindset here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles. Matt Miguez here. Today we're going to be talking about the New Orleans Saints and cap season. Every offseason we go through this here in this great state of Louisiana, where the Saints find themselves more times than not in the worst cap situation in the league and find their way out of it. Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast, joins me here to talk about the moves they've made so far and moves that are expected to be made here in the coming days as they have to get under that cap number by March 13th. Ross, good morning, man. How are you?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start with the big one, and it was quarterback Derek Carr. That was widely expected that it was going to get done just because of the fact that his contract is so large, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a 4-year, $150 million deal. So the Saints had a lot of wiggle room there. Walk me through that process, and what are the numbers looking like for Derek Carr now?
Yeah, I mean, the contract restructure saves around $23 million or so. That's kind of the biggest number that you need to remember with all of this. But the intent was always the moment that, this contract was signed, the intent was always that the contract was going to be restructured in 2024. So what they did was that they took his $30 million base salary, they reduced it, converted it to a signing bonus, that gap converted into a signing bonus, and then extended that over the course of 5 years. So that's how you save the $23 million. And so what that effectively does is that it gives the New Orleans Saints a humongous chunk of cap relief in a year that they got a higher salary cap than expected as well. They were aided effectively by the NFL, effectively handing them over an additional $13 million or so. Correct. Based on what we expected the salary cap to be and what it turned out to be. And so it's a huge step forward in their ability to be able to get under the salary cap. And obviously, Derek Carr was always going to be a big part of the mechanism of those contract restructures to help them get there.
And then the other two big moves have come on the defensive line with Nathan Shepard and Carl Granderson. Obviously, Carl Granderson having the year that he did, New Orleans wants to find a way to keep him around. I don't think that they want to make the same mistake that you maybe would call Trey Hendrickson. Mm-hmm. What were your thoughts on those two moves, and how smart was it of the Saints to shave those contracts?
Yeah, I'll start with the Nathan Shepard one. The Nathan Shepard one was super simple. They reduced his $4.1 million base salary, and then they saved like $2.3 million. Like that one was like a super quick, super easy thing to do. And he's a 30-year-old defensive tackle that's been in your system for a year and played really, really well for them last year. And so that was a pretty easy one to make that decision on. You're okay kicking that small amount of money down the road and saving that money here in 2023. Or 2024 rather. So that was a pretty easy and simple one. The Carl Granderson one was maybe the easiest out of any of the ones that they've done so far. So kind of like how Derek Carr's contract was so swollen going into this year that it was an obvious mechanism for restructures. Carl Granderson, they actually didn't even touch his base salary because his base salary is pretty low. It's like $1.17 million. It's a pretty low base. But what they did was that they gave him a $9 million roster bonus that would have become guaranteed if he were on the roster at a certain date anyway. So it's already guaranteed money. It's funny money to begin with. Teams tend to give players roster bonuses with the expressed intent of later restructuring that roster bonus Correct. Into a signing bonus. So this is one that we saw a million miles away. It was a $9 million bonus. They restructured it, saved $7.2 million. Super easy, super simple with that one. They gave him a brand new contract last year during the season. And so I think that, you look at that new contract that he was given, and then you consider, what were the mechanisms that were built into that contract at that time. That roster bonus already existed at that point. So you locked him down for, a long-term deal. And then now they restructure, which effectively doubles down on their investment in him. But with him as a young player that's really just starting to, come along here in the NFL, it was a wise move. Like it's an easy one to restructure and be okay with.
So now we're going to look at, moves that could come. Mm-hmm. And a big one is obviously Cam Jordan, right?
Hmm.
A fan favorite in New Orleans, obviously getting close to the end of his career, but he wants to finish his career in the black and gold. How can the Saints, kind of finagle his contract to save them some cap money and keep him in New Orleans?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things that they could do. I think a lot of people are waiting to kind of see what they're going to do with his contract, as in terms of him being like a restructure candidate. And the reason why you're looking at that is because he's 35 years old, and you, as you're restructuring players that are in that veteran, era of their career, things get a little bit dicier,
Yeah,
because as you push that money down the road, all of it accelerates the moment that that player leaves the organization and is no longer on the roster. Now, there are things that you can do with that. They did this with Drew Brees for years, and then it was time for him to retire. They reduced his salary to veteran minimum. They allowed his retirement to be a post June 1 transaction, which pushed money down the road and deferred it. Like, there's a lot of mechanisms to help with this. So there's two routes that the Saints could go with Cam Jordan. First of all, he's got a roster bonus of $6.7 million. That's, again, just like we mentioned, they give roster bonuses with the intent of restructuring
sure.
in the NFL. It's not even just a New Orleans Saints thing. That's an NFL thing. And so you would expect that to be restructured. The $6.3 million base salary could be very interesting. Do you go to him and say, hey, are you willing to reduce your salary to finish your career here in New Orleans? Because what you could do is go to a player, and I'll break this down a little bit when we talk about another move with Taysom Hill. Like, there's a way to do this with Taysom Hill too, but there's just a couple of different avenues that you can go with Cam Jordan. Now, I don't know that you want to go to your lifer player and say, would you be willing to take a reduced salary? So you probably just restructure it. And again, you're okay with doing that, especially on the roster bonus side, because that money's going to be guaranteed anyway.
Correct. And you brought up Taysom Hill. That's
Mhm.
one that, to be honest, I didn't even think about. The
Yeah.
player I was going to next was Demario Davis, but
Hmm.
I'm intrigued with what you have to say about Taysom Hill. So what do you have?
Yeah. Taysom's interesting one too. 34. I think he'll be older by the time that we get to the actual season, and everything. He's got a base salary this year of $10 million, and then no roster bonuses or anything like that. But his $10 million base salary is not guaranteed, is the thing. So when you look at the fact that there's zero guarantees left, there's a couple of different things that you can do here. If you believe that Taysom Hill won't be able to find $10 million somewhere else on the market, you go to them and you say, hey, we want you to take a reduced salary to get you a little bit more around where your market value is. Now, Taysom Hill's market value is really tricky because he's going to be like one of the top 10 tight ends in,
Right.
when teams look at him, or when organizations and when, rankings and things like that look at him and all. But he's designated as a quarterback, but he's also 34, 35 years old. He's got a niche fit in this New Orleans Saints offense that hasn't been developed elsewhere, that he's not been a part of elsewhere, all these other things. So what can he truly capture on the market will be the big question. And so if the Saints could get him to take a reduced salary that puts him a little bit more where they think his market might be, then that's not restructured money. That's not money that's kicked down the road. That's simply
Correct.
money saved. And so do the Saints have the leverage to do that? No, but it's not a leverage question. It's a, are you willing to do this for your organization, for your team question? Like, what can we do as an organization? Like, if I'm the New Orleans Saints, what can we do as an organization with the money that you allow us to reduce your salary to make sure that your year 35, your year 36, and your, final years here in the system are fruitful ones that maybe land you that championship ring that you've been searching for, whatever it might be. Like, those are the things that you're trying to do when you approach a Taysom Hill and say, what's the pay cut? You're not trying to level yourself as, having leverage or saying like, you have to do this for us or anything like that. He's going to say no, because he doesn't have to.
Right.
It's a, it's a request that the team could make to him as a, hey, are you able to help out your organization in this way, but so that we could reduce you to a more marketable and market value based salary.
Now, another interesting move that I read about, actually from one of our colleagues, Catherine Terrell from ESPN,
Hmm.
extending Andrus Pete.
Yeah.
Now, there's been a lot of, speculation about Pete. He had tons of injury concerns, didn't play that well when he was on the field. But here in 2023, he had the best year of his career.
Yep.
In your opinion, is it worth extending Andrews Pete for the $4 million that you would save?
Yeah, I think it's worth extending him if you don't have any other answers at left tackle. Like that's got to be the thing. You're not extending him to play left guard anymore. And if I'm Andrew Speed's representation, I'm not letting him stay anywhere or go anywhere to play on the interior. He played double-digit games at left tackle. I had his healthiest season and his most productive season as a pro, as you mentioned.
Correct.
If I'm Andrew Speed's representation, I'm getting him left tackle money somewhere. So the tricky part with extending him is that if you extend him, you have to extend him with starting left tackle money is what you're going to have to extend him with. So I think that, like, is it worth it? Yes, if you're going to actually utilize him as your left tackle, and if you're going to, give him that core responsibility, and you're okay with paying him that money. But that's one that I kind of shy away from. I think it's time for a split between the organization and Andrew Pete. Let him go and find a starting left tackle role elsewhere and find another way to save that money. You're going to have to incur, no matter what. I think it's like nearly $14 million of dead cap if you do that, but it's fine. Like, take it and then move on, because otherwise you're extending him and investing a ton of money into him as a starting left tackle. And if you're going to invest that money, don't invest it in a 31-year-old left tackle. Go and draft your next left tackle, or reinvest that into the left tackle you drafted 2 years ago,
Right.
and have so quickly seemed to have given up on.
And we could spend an hour on why it's crazy to give up on Trevor Penning this early.
Right.
But let's get to the elephant in the room. There was a tweet that came out a couple days ago saying that there are reports that Michael Thomas could be a post June 1st cut for the New Orleans Saints. How likely do you think that is? Is Mike's time in New Orleans done? What do you stand on that?
It's so interesting. This is the time of season to where, people find old reports and then turn them into new reports and things like that. The fact of the matter is that the designation of Michael Thomas as a post June 1 cut as a new league year begins it's literally in his contract. Like, it's a part of the contractual agreement between the team and the player. And so what they can do is either extend him before he becomes that post June 1 cut, or before the new league year begins, or you let it get to the first day of the league year, the contract automatically voids, and then he becomes designated as a post June 1 cut as agreed upon in the contract language. So this is fully expected at this point, and kind of always has been expected, that Michael Thomas would very likely not be a New Orleans Saints starting in 2024. When they gave him sort of the incentive heavy contract last year, they built this piece into that contract as well. And so as a part of that, if he would have gone out there and been able to stay out there, stay healthy and all that, which, by the way, isn't just on him, it's on the organization as well. Like,
Certainly.
for me, players and organizations share faults when it comes to consistent injury issues and things like that. It's not just a one-party thing. And so if he would have been able to be healthy in 2023 and reach some of those incentives, or have, that 100-catch, 1,000-yard, season, or 90-catch, 1,000-yard season, whatever, then we would be talking about this very differently. But it was very, very clear the moment that he was in the injury tent, week 10 or whatever it was, against week 10 against the Minnesota Vikings, and never made it back out onto the field, and then never made it back out onto the field for the rest of the season, that very likely this was going to be the end of Michael Thomas and the New Orleans Saints. And it's really, really, it's kind of sad, Matt, because if Michael Thomas isn't out there on a meaningless third down run in 2020 in a game that was already put away late in the fourth quarter against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, we might be talking about Michael Thomas having a 6-7 year dominating reign as one of the NFL's best wide receivers. And instead, we have 4 years of injury recovery, resilience, persistence, and ultimately a split that we expect now between Thomas and the New Orleans Saints.
Yeah, it's so frustrating because you brought it up. Without that play, I mean, Michael
Who
Thomas could have,
knows?
like you said, a 7-year run of being a top receiver in the NFL, and the Saints are doing anything possible to keep him in New Orleans.
Right.
So a very different situation than what we probably expected a couple of years ago. Ross, 2 more before I get you out of here.
Yeah, but
Number one, give me one more big salary cap move that you expect to come before March 13th.
Yeah, I think they already restructured Eric McCoy, which saved a good chunk of money. That one was kind of like a blend of what they did with Derek Carr, and that they restructured his base salary, but then there was also a roster bonus. So kind of like what they did with Carl Granderson as well. So I'll stay on the offensive line, and I'll look at Cesar Ruiz. We expect his contract to be restructured. That'll probably save $6.5 million. It's not your $23 million savings or anything like that, but it's certainly one that ends up moving the needle for you. And you're doing it again with a young player that you've already invested in very recently, and are therefore doubling down your investment on a young player that's going to effectively or ideally live out the life of his contract.
Yep.
Obviously, there's a lot of variables to that, but that's the expectation. And so that's one that makes a ton of sense. And then it'll be interesting to see also what they do with Alvin Kamara as well.
And then lastly, we haven't talked since the hiring of Clint Kubiak as offensive coordinator. What are you expecting out of him? Is he going to come in and run a Kyle Shanahan-esque offense, or is he going to want to, because he was the passing game coordinator for the 49ers. Does he maybe want to go with more of a pass heavier attack?
Yeah, the thing that's really interesting is that this is going to be, his bread and butter here in New Orleans, because the thing about the Kyle Shanahan offense is that before it was the Kyle Shanahan offense, it was the Mike Shanahan and Gary Kubiak offense. You go back to 1994 when those two were together with Steve Young over in San Francisco as the offensive coordinator, quarterback coach. Then they leave from there after that Super Bowl run. They go to Denver. They've got John Elway. They see a bunch of success with Mike Shanahan as the head coach, Gary Kubiak as the offensive coordinator. Then they go to Brian Greasy, who's now working with the San Francisco 49ers. They find success with him. Then Gary Kubiak goes to Houston, and then that begins the spread of what became known as the Shanahan offense, as Mike stayed in Denver, and Rick Dennison, who's now a part of the Saints staff, he takes over as the offensive coordinator there. Gary Kubiak goes to Houston as the head coach, and years later hires Kyle Shanahan, Mike Shanahan's son, to run their offense. And then Kyle Shanahan has this astronomical trajectory and has now created this coaching tree. But the thing about it is that Clint Kubiak was a part of all of that, right? It was his dad's system that is now being referred to as the Shanahan system, or the Kyle Shanahan system in the NFL. So I think that, yes, he brings the Kyle Shanahan system with him because he brings the original Shanahan Kubiak blend of what led to that offense in the NFL. So that's what I would expect from him, is to see one that relies on the run game, but is willing to attack over the middle of the field, takes the deep shots when necessary, and relies on the quick game, 3-step drop, quick pass, all those types of things, like just tempo and all those other pieces that we have kind of seen missing from this New Orleans Saints team over the course of the past couple of years. Everyone's going to talk about motion, play action, all those other things, but I think one of the biggest things that's going to benefit this team in Clint Kubiak's system, and especially with the addition of quarterback coach Andrew Janocko, is going to be the quick passing game. 3-step drop, get the ball out, helps your quarterback, gets the ball in the hands of your playmakers, and helps your offensive line a ton as well by getting the ball out quickly.
Which this roster is already pretty well built for, with playmakers like Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara, right?
Yep, absolutely. And then you factor in, Rashid Shaheed, and then now you have an opportunity to continue to add those types of playmakers, whether it's in free agency or the NFL draft. You get sort of your athletic offensive line out there, which I think needs a little bit of retooling for sure. And maybe they won't have a choice. They might have to retool it depending upon the health of players, the availability of players, who sticks around, who goes. But, the zone run on the offense, as that run offense continues to sort of take its new shape and take its new form, that will work really well in the sort of mold of what the New Orleans Saints are starting to build here in New Orleans as well.
Ross Jackson, host of the Locked On Saints podcast, joining us here on the Miguez Mindset. Ross, before you go, man, tell our listeners what's coming up on Locked On Saints and where they can find it.
Yeah, sure. Combine week. So everything you need to know about the combine, I'll be there in Indianapolis. So you can get all those updates every single day on the Locked On Saints podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All the written work over at Saints News Network as well. And you can find it all in one place on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson Nola, Nola.
You can find the Miguez Mindset on our YouTube page at ESPN Southwest Louisiana. Also, make sure you follow us on social media at ESPN_SWLA. That's going to do it for this episode of the Miguez Mindset. We'll be back later this week talking more college baseball, as well as March Madness right around the corner here on ESPN 103.7 Lafayette and 104.1 Lake Charles.